Imagine walking into a London museum, right, in October of 1984. You turn a corner into this exhibition space called the Boiler House, and you just come face to face with an 18,000-pound industrial robotic arm.
Just massive, imposing machinery.
Exactly. Only it isn't, welding car parts or moving pallets or whatever you'd expect. The organizers have actually draped it in a Frankenstein mask.
Right, a literal rubber mask.
Yeah. And they've programmed it to just aggressively hammer away at a mechanical typewriter.
It's just such a surreal image.
It really is. And that bizarre, deeply unsettling image isn't just some forgotten piece of modern art. It is the exact moment an entire society looked at the bleeding edge of the computing revolution and realized it was absolutely terrified of the future. So welcome to the deep dive.
It is such a striking visual to start with, because it perfectly captures the immense friction of the era we are pulling you, the listener, back to today.
Yeah, we've got a great stack of sources today.
We do. We are looking at sources from the October 1984 issue of PCW magazine. And the tech industry at this specific moment is currently experiencing, like, a supernova of expansion.
Oh, absolutely.
Startups are tossing around figures like 800% annual growth rates, as if that's just, a completely normal, sustainable business metric.
Which is insane.
Right. The marketing of the era is promising absolute miracles, these sleek boxes that will revolutionize your office overnight.
But the reality captured in these pages is so much darker and far more chaotic. Because behind those glossy ads, companies are quietly fighting off total financial ruin. The hardware they are selling is literally buckling under the sheer weight of its own ambition.
And the general public is so alienated by the pace of change that they are, as we saw with Boiler House, literally projecting 19th century literary monsters onto basic circuitry.
Yeah, they really are. So our mission today is to dissect that turbulence. Together, we are going to examine how severe hardware limitations, literal physical bottlenecks inside the machines, triggered massive operational crises at heavily hyped companies like Future Technology Systems, or FTS, and Future Computers.
And we will also unpack how corporate leadership fundamentally misunderstood market psychology. They took these technical failures and turned them into spectacular public relations disasters that completely shattered investor trust.
It's a masterclass in what not to do.
It really is. And we're going to look at why major players like Acorn realized the general public was so intimidated by, and frankly just unprepared for, this new technology that the companies themselves had to actively hide their most advanced products from the high street.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with that retreat from the high street, because Acorn is a huge name in this era.
Oh, massive.
They are heavily associated with getting computers into schools and homes in the UK, but in the sources, we see them previewing a brand new range of business machines. They were tentatively calling it the ABC, Acorn Business Computers, or the Enterprise.
Right, the Enterprise range.
Yeah. And we are talking about a machine priced around £250 for a 64K version, which, by the way, comes with built-in word processing, joystick ports, and networking facilities.
Which, for 1984, that is an aggressive, feature-rich package. It's really meant to capture the business market.
It is, but then they make this incredibly counterintuitive announcement about how they actually plan to sell the thing.
Yeah, they explicitly stated that the new Enterprise range would bypass the mass market entirely. Acorn stressed that you would not be able to just walk into a standard chain store.
Yeah.
Places that, the British public relied on for electronics, like Boots or W.H. Smith.
You couldn't just buy one off the shelf.
No, you couldn't.
Yeah.
They declared the machines were, quote, too complex for mass market chains to handle. And they restricted sales exclusively to a really tight network of specialized dealers.
I have to challenge the logic there, though. Is this genuinely a move to ensure quality control, or is Acorn just hiding behind a velvet rope?
Well, that's out the present.
Because it sounds like terrible user experience design masquerading as exclusivity. If your product is so complicated that a normal salesperson can't hand it over to a normal customer without the entire transaction ending in tears, maybe the problem isn't the distribution channel, right?
That's a fair point.
Maybe you've just built a hostile machine. It feels a bit like, a car manufacturer refusing to sell a sedan at a standard dealership, demanding buyers prove they have a mechanical engineering degree before they are allowed to turn the key.
The velvet rope analogy is tempting, I'll give you that. But the underlying motivation here was, honestly, pure, unadulterated fear. We really have to contextualize the massive chasm in 1984 between what consumers thought a computer was and what a business machine actually required you to do.
Right, because the expectations were so skewed.
Completely skewed. The mass market chains were accustomed to moving, pocket calculators or the absolute most rudimentary home micros. A family might buy a computer, plug it into their television, and type in 20 lines of basic code from a magazine just to make a pixel bounce around the screen.
So they were basically selling advanced toys.
Yes. That was the ceiling of mass market tech literacy at the time. Now contrast that with a networked business machine running a disk operating system.
Oh boy.
Yeah, there is no graphical interface here. No mouse, no clickable icons, no plug and play. If a consumer walked into a high street shop, saw a 250-pound machine, and just bought it on impulse, they would take it home, plug it in, and be greeted by a blinking cursor on a completely black screen.
Which is terrifying if you don't know what to do next.
Exactly. Initiating the built-in word processor required precise syntax. Connecting it to a network required an understanding of directory structures and command line prompts. Acorn knew that mass-market retail staff couldn't troubleshoot those issues.
Which meant the consumer would just put the machine back in the box and demand a refund.
Precisely. The dreaded mass-market return.
And if that happens at scale, it's an existential threat to the company, they would be drowning in inventory that wasn't technically broken, just hopelessly misunderstood.
And beyond the immediate financial hit of all those returns, the brand damage would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Acorn was already trying to pivot. Their famous BBC Micro was being used in offices, but as they admitted in the sources, this was happening, quote, almost accidentally.
Right. It wasn't their main strategy.
Right. They wanted to approach the lucrative business sector, open-armed, with this new enterprise range. But business buyers are notoriously risk-averse.
Very true.
If the enterprise became known in the popular press as a frustrating, unusable brick that everyday consumers were returning in droves, no corporate IT buyer would touch it. So the specialized dealer network was a buffer.
Ah, I see.
The dealer's job was to act as a translator between a highly capable but deeply unintuitive piece of hardware and the end user.
Okay, so Acorn was terrified the public would break their machines out of sheer ignorance.
Yes, exactly.
But if we walk across London to the Victoria and Albert Museum that exact same month, we see Acorn actually had the dynamic entirely backward.
Oh, completely.
The public wasn't ignorant, they were actively terrified. Which brings us back to that incredible scene at the Boiler House exhibition we touched on earlier.
The robot exhibition perfectly encapsulates the societal dread that was just simmering right beneath the surface of this whole home computing boom.
Let's just linger on the physical absurdity of this exhibition for a moment, because you walk into this space and you don't just see machines performing tasks, you see an 18,000-pound industrial robot from Silver Reed.
And Silver Reed was primarily known for making typewriters.
Right. And instead of demonstrating its precision by, say, assembling a delicate watch, it's disguised as Frankenstein's monster, forcefully using a typewriter. And then, just a few feet away, an incredibly advanced robot built by IBM has been programmed to sit at a table and play a solitary game of cards.
It is literally playing solitaire.
It's playing solitaire.
Yeah. The organizers were not being subtle about their thesis at all. They told the magazine explicitly that the exhibition was designed to show how the concept of man-like machines was frightening to the majority of people.
They actually spelled it out.
They really did. They went so far as to draw a direct historical parallel. They reminded visitors that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein during the exact same period when the Luddites were physically smashing new industrial looms.
That is a staggering parallel to force on the public, though. The Luddites weren't smashing looms because they were afraid the looms would come alive, right?
No, not at all.
They smashed them because the looms threatened their livelihoods. It was economic. But by dressing this typing robot as Frankenstein's monster, the organizers are layering an existential, almost primal dread over an economic one.
It's a huge shift in narrative.
Yeah, they are using this incredibly expensive, cutting-edge corporate hardware to manifest the ultimate cautionary tale. Humanity creating a monster that ultimately destroys its creator.
The exhibition reveals this deep psychological schism. The general public is staring at these metal arms, and they are projecting malice, intent, and a frightening autonomy onto them. They literally see a replacement for humanity.
It's so intense.
But the source material provides a fascinating contrast. It notes what the actual computer enthusiasts, the readers of PCW magazine, were doing at that exact same exhibition.
And this is the detail that completely reframes the entire story for me. Because the enthusiasts, they are ignoring the Frankenstein mask. They are ignoring the playing cards.
They don't care about the theatrics.
Not at all. They are huddled around a series of mundane computer terminals placed way off to the side of the exhibits, because those terminals are displaying the real-time thoughts of the monsters.
Right.
They are showing the literal programming instructions being fed to the robots.
And those instructions expose the massive gap between perceived magic and mundane reality. The terrifying, thoughts of Frankenstein's monster consisted of roughly 800 lines of incredibly basic code.
Commands like move, wait, and rotate. Yeah. That is the entire intellectual depth of the monster that society is terrified of. Society is projecting this dark, sophisticated intent onto a machine that is fundamentally constrained by a tiny memory bank and a rigid, inescapable loop of move, wait, rotate.
So rudimentary.
It has no will. It has no agency. It is literally just executing a geometry problem.
The Boiler House exhibition illustrates a timeless human tendency. We always rush to fill the void of our own technical misunderstanding with our deepest societal fears.
We still do it today.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the modern equivalent for the listener today. We interact with a predictive text algorithm or a generative language model, and when it produces a startlingly coherent paragraph, what do? We immediately project sentience onto it.
Right. We assume it's alive.
We assume the system possesses a will, a worldview, or a hidden bias. But at the lowest level of its architecture, beneath the polished interface, it is still just executing mathematical weights and probabilities. It is, at its core, a highly scaled-up version of wait and rotate.
That's such a great way to look at it. But while the public was terrified of the dark magic they thought these machines could do, the people actually funding the tech revolution were dealing with a much more grounded, terrifying reality.
What the machines couldn't do.
Exactly. What they physically could not do. The gap between the marketing brochures and the physical limits of the hardware was about to swallow companies whole. So let's look at future technology systems, or FTS.
Yeah, the magazine drastically underplays the situation by calling it a storm in a teacup.
A bit of an understatement.
A massive understatement. Because when you trace the technical details provided in the source to their logical financial conclusions, the FTS story is a full-blown corporate nightmare. It demonstrates how a single hardware bottleneck can derail a company experiencing hypergrowth.
Okay. To understand the crash, we really have to look at how fast the train was moving.
Right.
FTS is aggressively pushing a mini computer based on an Intel 8086 chip, and they are running IBM software, specifically version 1.0 of it, under an operating system called concurrent DOS.
Which is a crucial detail.
Right, because the primary selling point, the reason they are reportedly growing at 800%, is that they are pitching this as a multi-user environment. They are promising businesses that they can buy this one central processor, plug a bunch of dummy terminals into it, and have an entire office working simultaneously off one machine.
The ambition is clear, but the architecture of 1984 simply wasn't robust enough to support it without significant compromise. The Intel 8086 was, a revolutionary piece of silicon, but it had severe physical limitations regarding how much data it could process and route simultaneously.
You could only do so much at once.
Right. And concurrent DOS was designed to multitask, to juggle the demands of multiple users. But the physical pathway connecting all these components had a heartbreaking point.
The source notes that the machine failed under what the company called highly unusual circumstances.
Highly unusual.
Yeah, air quotes around that. And the specific component that failed was the system bus. I want to pause here because that sounds like highly sanitized corporate speak. What exactly is the system bus, and what does it actually mean when it breaks in a multi-user setup?
So the system bus is essentially the central nervous system, or think of it like the main physical highway on the computer's motherboard.
Okay, a highway.
Whenever the Intel 8086 processor needs to retrieve data from the memory, or send a keystroke to one of those external dummy terminals, those electrical signals have to travel down the system bus. And it has a maximum bandwidth.
What's the physical infrastructure? It's the roads.
Precisely. If you attach multiple terminals and all those users are running applications simultaneously under concurrent DOS, you are flooding that highway with traffic.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. So when FTS says the machine failed under highly unusual circumstances, what that actually translates to is when our customers actually tried to use the multi-user feature we sold them, the sheer volume of simultaneous data requests overwhelmed the physical bandwidth of the system bus.
So the highway just gridlocked.
The highway gridlocked. The hardware could not route the traffic fast enough, causing the entire system to crash or physically lock up.
Wow. And this wasn't like a minor bug you could just patch with a floppy disk update in the mail. This was a fundamental physical architecture failure.
No, it was baked into the board.
And the domino effect of that is staggering because FTS had to immediately suspend all deliveries of the computer.
They had no choice.
Right. They physically could not ship a product they knew would collapse the moment a business plugged it in and tried to use it as advertised. And the source states it took them 2 agonizing months to engineer a physical solution to this.
And those 2 months are the absolute crux of the crisis. To understand why a 2-month delay nearly destroyed the company, we have to examine the mathematics of 800% growth.
It's expensive to grow that fast.
Exactly. Scaling a hardware business at that velocity requires massive, continuous capital expenditure.
Growing at 800% it's like shoveling coal into a freight train engine as fast as humanly possible, right?
Yeah.
You are moving incredibly fast, but the momentum itself is dangerous. You are leasing new manufacturing space. You are aggressively hiring assembly line workers. You are buying up supply chains of raw materials.
They're spending a fortune.
Yes. And you are doing all of this based on the assumption that the revenue from future computer sales will cover those massive overhead costs.
The freight train metaphor is perfect because the overhead is the momentum. If the tracks suddenly disappear because your system bus fails and you have to halt all deliveries, you cannot simply stop the train.
You can't just unhire everyone for 2 months.
No.
Yeah.
For 2 months, FTS had 0 incoming revenue from their primary product line. But their outgoing expenses, the payroll, the leases, the part suppliers, those remained at that 800% growth level.
Ouch.
The cash burn rate would have been astronomical. A 2-month revenue drought doesn't just defer profits in that scenario, it completely drains the company's operating capital.
They literally ran out of money to keep the lights on.
Guess they did.
And the source shows exactly how desperate they became. FTS had to initiate a massive rights issue to raise £427,000. Now, a rights issue, that sounds like a polite financial euphemism for begging your current investors to save you from bankruptcy, isn't it?
It is exactly what it is. A rights issue is a mechanism where a company offers existing shareholders the right to buy additional new shares, typically at a heavily discounted price.
Okay.
It is the fastest way to inject capital into a bleeding company, but it is a massive red flag to the market because it heavily dilutes the value of the shares those investors already hold.
It's basically asking the people who already gave you money to double down on a bet that has clearly gone wrong. Like, hey, we burned through the first round of cash because our hardware literally broke. Please give us another £500,000 so we can fix the roads.
The source notes that all but 2 of the company's 16 institutional investors paid into the rights issue.
Wow, okay.
So 14 of them gritted their teeth, opened their wallets, and paid the ransom, essentially, to protect their initial investments from going entirely to zero.
Man, that is a tough pill to swallow. So the hardware failure ignited the crisis, but the cash flow drought is what actually forced them to the brink.
Right.
And you would think that a near-death experience like that would prompt some deep introspection from the leadership team. You would expect, a little humility.
You would hope so.
But the human element, the management, takes this operational crisis and just pours gasoline all over it. The boardroom maneuvers here turn a technical failure into a masterclass in how to obliterate market confidence.
The transition from a panicked rights issue to a full-blown public relations disaster is breathtaking.
It's almost comical.
It is. So FTS knew the investors were unhappy about coughing up £427,000. To placate them, the company commissioned an independent report from the prestigious accounting firm, Coopers and Lybrand.
Oh, Coopers.
Yeah. The hope was that Coopers would audit the books and release a statement saying, essentially, the underlying business is sound, the 8% growth is real, they just had a temporary engineering hiccup.
Right. They wanted a clean bill of health to calm the nerves.
Exactly.
But that is not what Coopers and Lybrand delivered. Instead, the report apparently detailed, quote, appalling financial mismanagement at FTS.
Not what you want to hear.
No. And then one of those investors, presumably one of the 2 who refused to pay into the rights issue and just wanted to burn the house down, leaked that devastating report straight to the Financial Times.
Once the appalling financial mismanagement headline hits the Financial Times, the internal crisis becomes entirely public.
Everyone knows.
Every potential customer, every supplier, and every competitor now knows that FTS is fundamentally unstable.
And this is where we see two different executives attempt to control the narrative, and both of their strategies are just completely disconnected from reality.
Yeah, it's wild.
Let's look at the outgoing managing director, Peter McHugh. His response to the leaked report is to essentially plug his ears and claim the house isn't on fire.
McHugh attempts a strategy of aggressive normalization. He downplays the leaked document entirely. He tells the press that the Cooper's audit was really only one part of a much larger report, attempting to suggest the leak was taken entirely out of context.
He actually tells the magazine that a massive cash flow crisis and an emergency bailout is, quote, just the sort of problem any company growing at 800% could be expected to have.
Which is just absurd.
He's trying to convince the market that nearly going bankrupt because your computer doesn't work is just standard operating procedure for a tech startup.
It is a remarkable level of denial.
Yeah.
Furthermore, he tries to distract the press by pivoting to sales. He claims that major orders are just flooding in from companies like Honeywell and Computer Market,
which the magazine absolutely skewers him for. They point out the sheer absurdity of citing Honeywell. Honeywell was a company that had an infamously dismal track record in the microcomputer space at that time.
They were not a lifeline.
No. And even worse, Computer Market was actually the company McHugh was leaving FTS to go run.
It's so blatant.
It's unbelievable. He's essentially telling the market, don't worry about the financial mismanagement here. My new employer down the road is totally going to buy a bunch of our computers. It is so transparently self-serving that it completely destroys whatever credibility he had left.
McHugh's denial was severely damaging, yes. But the actions of his replacement, the new managing director, Sir Monty Finniston, were actively destructive.
This guy.
Right. Finniston was brought in with a formidable reputation. The magazine refers to him as the famous champion of engineers. Now, in a crisis of this magnitude, the market expects a seasoned veteran to come in, acknowledge the difficulties, provide a clear roadmap for the engineering fix, and project a steady, calming presence.
Right, you want the adult in the room. But wait, let's look at what actually happens. So the company is bleeding cash, their flagship hardware is broken, their internal audits cite appalling mismanagement. And what does Sir Monty Finniston do on his first day navigating this mess?
He goes to war.
He goes scorched earth. Instead of calming the investors, he attacks the press. He publicly threatens to sue journalists if they dare to suggest that Peter McHugh's departure had anything to do with the appalling financial mismanagement outlined in the Cooper's report. What is the psychology there? Why attack the people reporting on the fire instead of putting out the fire?
It is a profound miscalculation of leverage and optics. Finniston is attempting to rule by intimidation. He's applying an outdated, authoritarian corporate strategy to a highly volatile tech startup.
It just doesn't fit.
It doesn't. But his most disastrous move wasn't threatening the press. It was turning his aggression on his own lifelines.
Oh, this part is crazy.
He publicly declared his intention to send the bill for the Coopers and Lybrand report directly to the disenchanted investor who leaked it to the Financial Times.
He is literally picking a public fight with the very people keeping his company afloat.
Yep.
The institutional investors just bailed the company out to the tune of £427,000, and his priority is to wage a petty billing war against them in the media.
If we evaluate the combined impact of McHugh's delusion and Finniston's hostility, we see the complete erosion of the most valuable asset a tech company possesses, which is trust.
Trust is everything.
In the tech market of 1984, the technology itself was constantly shifting and, as we've seen, frequently failing. Investors and corporate buyers were largely placing bets on the competence and transparency of the management team.
They are investing in the people solving the problems, not just the plastic box on the desk.
Exactly. When the market sees an outgoing MD spinning obvious fictions about sales orders and an incoming MD threatening journalists and alienating key investors, the message is unequivocal.
It screams panic.
It broadcasts deep systemic instability. Finniston proved that the leadership team was far more concerned with settling scores and hiding reality than fixing the system bus and stabilizing the cash flow. By refusing to own the narrative, they ensured that market confidence in FTS would remain permanently crippled.
It really highlights how the hardware sets the baseline, but human ego dictates the outcome.
Well said.
But what is truly fascinating about this era is that FTS wasn't an isolated case of a company struggling against the limits of 1984 reality. The source material introduces us to another major player dealing with massive friction, and that's future computers.
Right.
And they were facing an entirely different kind of existential threat.
The contrast between FTS and future computers is highly instructive. It shows us the difference between a micro-level operational disaster like FTS and a macro-level market shift.
Let's look at how future computers tried to position themselves amidst all this chaos. They were desperately trying to publicly distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of FTS.
Naturally.
They released a formal statement explicitly pointing out that they were a completely separate entity, and they even took the opportunity to describe FTS as troubled, which the magazine cheekily notes is entirely fair.
It was fair.
But it's not a clean break. They are heavily entangled because they share personnel and investors with a major distributor called Encotel, which handles the machines for both companies.
Despite that messy association with the Encotel network, future computers actually managed to project enough confidence to secure a significant injection of capital.
Which is impressive given the climate.
It is. They raised £1 million from major backers, including established names like Memorex and APA Venture Capital.
But the truly revealing detail isn't the £1 million. It's what they told those investors they were going to do with it.
Right.
Bob Jones, a co-founder of the Encotel distributor, goes on record predicting that future computers will hit £10 million worth of sales in 1984. But then he drops a massive caveat. He expects that a staggering 90% of their sales in the following year, 1985, will come entirely from networking installations, specifically their FX ring.
That 90% figure is a huge structural pivot. If FTS failed because their specific piece of hardware broke, Future Computers was acknowledging that the entire concept of the standalone piece of hardware was dying.
The era of selling a plastic box that sits isolated on a desk was over.
Exactly. The magazine's analysis of this pivot is incredibly sharp. They note that Bob Jones's prediction might be a case of extreme, unfounded optimism regarding their networking capabilities. But alternatively, it was a subtle, coded warning to the investors.
A warning that the market was shifting.
The market for ordinary, standalone hardware sales was collapsing. The margins were shrinking. The competition was too dense. Future Computers realized that to survive, they couldn't just sell the computer. They had to sell the nervous system connecting the office.
The problem with pivoting your entire corporate survival strategy to networking in 1984, though, is that building a network back then was agonizingly difficult because of severe physical bottlenecks.
Oh, it was a nightmare.
And the sources give us a brilliant window into how frustrating that technology was through an article detailing a British design network called Cachenet.
The Cachenet article, which was developed by Icon Research in Cambridge, perfectly diagnoses the physical barrier Future Computers was up against. The fundamental flaw with early local area networks, or LANs, was that typical business software of the era was what engineers called disk-bound.
I want to break down that term disk-bound because it perfectly illustrates the friction between processing power and physical reality.
Yeah, it's key.
What does it actually mean for a user trying to, say, pull up a spreadsheet on a 1984 network?
Icon Research provided a beautifully simple theory in the article. They noted that when a user sits at a computer and experiences a delay when the machine appears to be, thinking, it is almost never the processor that is the bottleneck.
The chip isn't the slow part.
No, the silicon chips of 1984 were actually remarkably fast at performing calculations. The true delay was mechanical.
It's the physical disk drive.
Yes, the system is literally waiting for the mechanical arm of the floppy disk drive to physically move across the spinning magnetic surface of the diskette, locate the specific track containing the data, read it, and then physically move again to find the next required piece of data.
It's like employing the world's most brilliant, lightning-fast mathematician to do your accounting, but you lock him in a room where he has to walk across the floor, open a heavy metal filing cabinet, and manually search through paper folders every single time he needs to reference a specific number.
That is a perfect analogy.
The math happens in a microsecond, but the walking back and forth takes all day.
Exactly. Now, extrapolate that mathematician's walk across an entire network. If you have 10 users in an office, and they are all sending requests down the network cables to access data from one central mechanical disk drive, the system grinds to an absolute halt.
Because the arm can't be in 10 places at once.
Right. The mechanical arm is thrashing back and forth frantically, trying to serve 10 people at once. The network becomes practically unusable because the physical mechanism simply cannot keep up with the electrical signals.
It's a physical limitation of the moving parts.
Icon Research pointed out that while hard disks were an improvement over floppies, random access memory RAM, which operates entirely electronically with zero moving parts, was roughly 1,000 times faster than a hard disk.
So the bottleneck isn't the data itself, it's the moving parts. So how did Cachenet actually attempt to solve this massive mechanical traffic jam?
They utilized a cache. Cachenet required the installation of 256K of additional RAM.
Which was a lot back then.
It was a massive and highly expensive amount of memory for a standard office setup in 1984. This dedicated RAM cache acted as a high-speed waiting room. Instead of constantly interrogating the slow mechanical disk, the system would load the most frequently requested data sectors directly into the electronic RAM.
But it didn't just load what you asked for, right? It tried to, predict the future.
That was the true innovation here. When a user requested a specific sector of data, CacheNet didn't just grab that one sector. It pulled that sector and the 31 sectors immediately adjacent to it on the disk.
Oh, wow.
And it held them all in the lightning-fast RAM. The system gambled that if you needed page 1 of a document, you're highly likely to need page 2 shortly thereafter.
Which is a pretty safe bet.
Yeah. By holding that anticipated data in memory, they entirely bypassed the mechanical delay of the disk drive for subsequent requests. Icon Research claimed this caching technique made their network operate at something approaching 10 times the in-use speed of rival systems.
It is an incredibly elegant workaround for a severe physical limitation. But thinking about the sheer cost and complexity of requiring massive RAM caches just to make a network function at a usable speed, it brings me right back to future computers.
The 90% pivot.
Exactly. They told their investors that 90% of their sales would rely on moving this kind of networking hardware. So I have to ask, was future computers being visionary by abandoning standalone PCs? Or was betting the entire farm on incredibly fragile, bottleneck network infrastructure just a desperate Hail Mary from a company running out of options?
The reality is it's a complex mix of both. They were undeniably visionary in their market diagnosis. Networking was the inescapable future of corporate computing. The isolated desk machine was a dead end.
They saw the writing on the wall.
They did. However, their execution timeline was deeply problematic. They were attempting to build a massive commercial empire on a technological foundation that was still constantly colliding with the physical limits of mechanics and memory costs.
They were too early.
As we saw with FTS, when you push fragile 1984 architecture past its breaking point, the resulting failures quickly destroy cash flow and investor patience. Future Computers was making the right bet, but possibly a decade too early for the hardware to actually support the margins they needed to survive.
The friction between the grand vision and the physical reality is the defining theme of this entire era. We have covered a massive amount of ground from these sources today. Let's synthesize what this snapshot of October 1984 actually reveals for you, the listener.
If we pull all these disparate threads together, we see an industry defined by its limitations rather than its capabilities.
Which is the opposite of how we usually view tech history.
Exactly. We saw Acorn, paralyzed by the gap in public tech literacy, actively hiding their advanced enterprise machines behind specialized dealers, out of fear that mass-market ignorance would just destroy their brand.
The velvet rope.
Right. We watched FTS attempt to scale at 800% only to have their momentum completely destroyed when a single physical component, the system bus, failed to handle the traffic of a multi-user environment.
And we saw how the resulting financial panic was compounded by leadership that chose hostility and ego over transparency.
And then we have Future Computers, recognizing that the standalone hardware market was a race to the bottom, pivoting heavily into networking, only to slam headfirst into the mechanical reality of disk-bound bottlenecks.
Everywhere you look, the ambition of the technologists is being dragged down by the cold, hard limits of physics and consumer psychology.
And that dynamic is precisely why these historical sources are so vital for you, the listener, today. The hardware we use has evolved exponentially. I mean, we measure memory in terabytes now, not kilobytes. But the underlying human and corporate behaviors remain absolutely identical.
That is so true.
When you're evaluating a modern tech giant or a heavily hyped startup today, whether they are promising fully autonomous driving software or revolutionary artificial intelligence models or quantum computing, you have to look past the marketing. You have to identify the modern equivalent of the system bus.
What is the physical or logistical bottleneck that could derail their momentum?
Yes. And more importantly, how does their leadership react when that inevitable breakdown occurs? Because it will occur. When a server farm overheats, or an algorithm produces a disastrous result, do the executives act like Peter McHugh, offering hollow denials and pointing to phantom sales? Do they act like Sir Monty Finniston, lashing out at the press and alienating the very people funding their vision?
Or do they own the failure?
Exactly. Do they own it, transparently address the limitations of their technology, and work to maintain that fragile trust that ultimately dictates survival? Technology will always advance, but the capacity for human mismanagement is a constant.
We get so caught up analyzing the microchips and the code that we forget the real story is always driven by the people desperately trying to sell the vision and the public trying to understand it.
Speaking of the public's understanding, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Returning to that incredible image at the Boiler House exhibition we started with.
The typing Frankenstein.
In 1984, society looked at a robotic arm executing rudimentary move and rotate commands, and they saw the terrifying specter of Frankenstein's monster. They wrapped their deep-seated historical anxieties about industrialization and obsolescence around a machine that possessed absolutely no actual intent.
They projected a monster onto the machine because the mechanics of the code were invisible to them.
Precisely. So the provocative question for you to explore on your own is this: what perfectly mundane, invisible technological infrastructure are we currently projecting our own deepest societal fears onto today?
Oh, that's a great question.
When we interact with a sophisticated recommendation algorithm or a predictive language model, are we seeing monsters that aren't really there? Are we so distracted by the modern masks we put on our technology that we are failing to understand the simple mathematical instructions running underneath?
That is a fascinating lens to view our modern tech anxieties through. It brings us right back to our starting premise. We desperately want the world of technology to be clear, precise, and easily diagnosed like an X-ray.
But it never is.
Never. The reality is always profoundly murky. It's driven by an endless collision between human ambition, unyielding physical limits, and our own deep-seated fears. Thank you for joining us as we explored these sources and navigated the diagnostic muddy waters of 1984 tech chaos. We'll be back next time to unpack another stack of sources and find the insight hidden within.